Hello and welcome, Brett here with ClickMail.co. In this video, we're going to talk about a mental model called the margin of safety. And this is how we can assess how much risk is acceptable. Because when we're making good decisions, in order to get fruit, we have to have risk, right? It's very true. The more risk, how do you say, the higher risk you take, the higher potential for reward. But there is a limit because the higher risk also decreases the likelihood of reward. And an example of this would be, well, I'm going to play the lottery. Well, you've got like 1 in 200 million chances. Is the reward potentially very high? Yes. Is that a wise risk? No, because you're going to lose your money. So the higher the risk, the higher the potential for reward. But what we want to do is we want to limit the risk. We don't want to take no risk. And I think this is the place that ministries and often believers in general tend to be more conservative and we're a little more leery of risk. Ooh, it's risky. No, we want to have just the right amount of risk that when we take that risk repeatedly, it ensures a good return. So we want to increase risk and we want to minimize the potential for loss. And so this is what we call margin of safety. And we're going to start looking at that right now. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. So when we make an investment, when we invest our resources in any way, we have what we might say, this is us here considering, and we have what we might say to be the average value. And this is going to be a very rough drawing, but let's say we have what we believe to be the average value of the thing that we're doing, whatever that is. And now at some point, so let's say, this is the increasing, and just for simplicity's sake, maybe we'll say this is just a dollar value, and we'll talk about this in sort of an economic way, but this very much applies spiritually and just in our lives in general. Relationally, we can, this model applies. Okay, so let's just say the average value of a thing is increasing. Well, what are we willing to pay to get into this? I don't want to pay market value because as something goes up, usually what's going to happen is it's going to come down at some point. And when we talk about a bubble, we've probably looked at this at some points. With the bubble, it comes sort of up like this, and then it goes way, 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 way up. And then we have sort of a fake crash, and then boom, way down, and it comes all the way down. And a lot of times it bottoms out way down here, and then it repeats. And this is the bubble process, and it comes way up, boom, and we get a little fake drop, and then it drops straight down again. And we just repeat this. If you look at economies, this is very common, okay? Now, so we're here, and we're looking at this thing having a value of some amount. Well, I don't want to buy it for its exact value. Let's say here, the thing is $10, whatever it is. I don't want to buy a $10 thing for $10 because I don't have a guarantee that this is going to continue to rise. I don't have a guarantee that there are more people in my community wanting to come into the ministry. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so I need to hedge against it and make sure that the decision has a minimum loss factor built in. So we're going to see how to do this. So for example, where is this $10? Well, it could be here, up here, or it could be over here. But it's very hard to know that. Even very skilled, let's say in this case, economists and investors, even very skilled investors have a hard time figuring out where we are in these sort of cycles. But when you look in the past, you see these cycles. If you're here and you buy at $10, you're going to make 30 bucks, assuming you sell at the right time. If you're here and you buy, you're going to lose everything, and your shoes because you're actually going to go negative here. And so we don't know where we're buying. What we want to do is we want to say, I want to buy and I want to make sure there is a margin of safety. So if something were to happen, right, we're being prudent. If something were to happen, there is distance between me and whatever calamity may or may not happen. And the one easy way to think about this is the buffer that you drive with between you and the car in front of you. Now, I've ridden with some people and they are like riding the bumper of the guy in front of them on the highway. And the margin of safety here is essentially zero. They're buying at value. they're going 65, the person in front of them is driving 65, and they've got like 10 feet between the bumper in front of them. Well, what happens if the car in front of them stops? How much margin of safety time have they bought themselves before they crash in and go right through the back of that guy's car? Basically zero. But if you, and this is what they taught me in driver's ed growing up, it's give yourself at least 3 seconds buffer time between you and the car in front of you. So give some space there, because if they hit the brakes, you need time to see it, react, and hit the brakes yourself. And that's what a margin of safety is. We use that in driving. So moral of that story, don't ride people's bumpers. Anyway, so we don't know where we're sort of making this purchase. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that if I'm making the purchase, in this case here, I have some margin of safety between here and the edge of that cliff right there. That would be a really, but there is no margin of safety here. So how do we do this? What we have to do is we have to look at the system. We have to look at the thing and say, do I really think the value of it is $10? Yes. Okay. Well, I'm not going to buy at $10. So I want to make sure I have a 20% margin of safety, margin of error, something like that. So I need to actually buy a $10 thing at $8. And you can notice here, immediately we're talking about fruit. If you buy a $10 thing for $10, and we look at, I'm curious here. Yes, we have looked at asymmetry, and you look at the symmetricality here. What do you lose? $10 in cash, and then what do you gain? $10 in, let's say, a stock of Walmart or whatever it is. Well, that is symmetric. That's not asymmetric. That is not beneficial anyway. I'm just shifting around resources, and we said we don't really want to do that. Now, if I want to have a 10% margin or 20% margin of error, I'm putting in, let's say, $8, but on the upside, I'm getting $10. So I have a little 20% difference here. That's looking a little bit better. 20% gain, if you can keep that, is really good. So what happens? Well, I'm watching this go up, and what happens, instead of following the trajectory that maybe it should follow because the value is actually there, let's say there's some kind of an event and people begin to panic a little bit, and the value of this thing actually dips down for a little while. And then what? Well, after some amount of time, we would assume it would go back up if the value is really there. So the margin of safety, then, we'll say it goes down to 750. Okay. And the question is what is actually the value of this thing we're buying? Well, if it's actually 10, and as over time, let's say 10, maybe it's here, it's 11. Okay. So let's say I'm assessing and I'm going, well, based on where it was here, nothing's really changed with the company itself. It's more like, politics is going on and people are feeling unstable, and so they're selling more. Well, if I think that this thing's actually still going up in value because the company is still doing great, it's still doing its thing, and the value of that company has come down. As an example of this, I had a friend who bought into all of the cruise line companies during COVID. And he just put a bunch of money in each one of them. And I'm not making any specific investment advice here, but he split cash between all of them because he's like, well, hey, even if one or two tip over, that last one's going to pick up all the business when it comes back. He did very well. Why? Nothing changed with the cruise companies. It was external factors to the cruise companies. And so as soon as that pandemic lets up, people are going to start, not only are they going to start going on cruises, they're going to go on cruises like crazy because they've been pent up in their house for 2 years. So it comes down, okay, well, let's think about this. If I buy at 750 and the value's actually 11, what is my margin for error? Well, that's almost like 40%. So what's that mean? I could be up to 40% wrong in my assessment and still break even, because again, what's the goal with our strategy? If you haven't watched the strategy course, go watch the strategy course. The goal is, number one, before growth, is sustainability. I have to at least not lose money. And that's what the margin of error does. It allows me to be wrong here by, let's say, 40% before I'm going negative. And that is huge. The likelihood that you're 40% wrong on, let's just say, this investment is low. Maybe you're 10% wrong or 20% wrong. Well, cool. I still make $2. Instead of making $4, I make $2 for every dollar I invested. That's a 20% gain. That's crazy. You can't do that in most investing situations. a good gain year over year over the course of your investing lifetime would be like 10% in today's economy. Well, in the American economy. And that's over the last 150 years. So if you're looking at anything greater than 10% gain, you're doing great. You're doing really good. And so here we're looking possibly at an upside of 40%, but we could still be 40% wrong, not lose a dime. And if we're anything less, we're still making a profit, and that's growth. And so this is what a margin of error will do for you. And so when we're considering investment, and when I'm talking about investment now, I am talking about investing the resources God has given you. So when we're talking about our skills, our talents, our gifts, where can you invest those in the kingdom that provide you the largest margin of error? Okay, so if I go to this country, the likelihood that I'm going to put those resources into people there and see a fruit maybe is this much. We've got a 5% margin of error because they're very resistant to the gospel. Well, maybe your gifts over in this country, you're going to minister to people one way or the other. All right. And if God's telling you, you get to pick where you go. Okay. Well, these people over here are very receptive and they're not Christians. It's a very open minded culture. And my gifts would be better served over there. And I could be, I have a 50%, a 60% margin of error. And that allows me a lot more confidence to know not only is the ministry going to be sustainable over the long run, but will probably produce a really good fruit. That's just one way you can think this through. And again, when we're using these models, what I showed you is more of like maybe a formal way to assess the value of a stock or something like that, and when to purchase. This is something people do with Bitcoin and like all these other financial investments. When you do this in life and ministry, it's not as cut and dry, but what you're looking for as you're assessing these opportunities and these decisions in your mind is, do I have some buffer between me and whatever potential, calamity could happen, so that I have room and time to maneuver to get growth, to make sure I can sustain long enough. So, as an example of this in Christian business, we'll say, what is the length, the duration that your average client stays? That's very important. You want to offer a really good service so that your clients stay for a really long time. And what does that do? Well, that means your business is more stable without the need for more clients coming in. That's really important, because what happens when you have an economic downturn? What happens when you have a pandemic that nobody foresaw and everybody disappears and nobody's looking to do business right now because they're afraid? Your client base provides you the income to sustain because they're not leaving, because they know you do a good job and they know they're safe with you. That provides you a higher margin for error. But if you're taking, for example, like let's say you do really, really good, but you're taking only web design clients. That's something that a lot of marketing firms will do. They just say, well, we specialize in web design. That's really great when times are good. But as soon as people get scared, a web design client's 90 days. Your margin for error, your buffer between you and calamity is 90 days, because as soon as people quit signing up to get websites, there's no more money coming in. And so that would be a more a higher risk business model. So like over here at ClickMill, we have month-to-month service options in any number of different ways. And then we also offer web design, and we have awesome web design, designers here with the team. And that's a bonus. That's gravy on top. That's the growth. That's the profit. But if no web design clients came in, I don't really care, because we are sustainable over the long run because we have super awesome clients that stay a long time. So we have a large margin of safety there on the front end. So with that, this is margin of safety, margin for error. Make sure when you're making decisions, you're not making them at cost. You're buying low, and you've got that gap between you and whatever it is you need to be at to break even. So with that, again, margin of error, margin of safety. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'll look forward to seeing you in the very next video. God bless.